Imagine, Episode 18, by Bernard King and Nicholas Lumarine. Nicholas is no more. Imagine cannot be finished. But you have been promised a book with two endings, and the first ending is yet to come. Jerome must now clear the crime scene and find Gemma. But something awaits him, something that cannot possibly happen, but it has. The smoke was rising from where the car had been. There would be bits scattered everywhere. The heavy parts, the engine and the chassis, would be lying twisted somewhere. Nicholas would be no more, just the dripping patches of red on the quarry walls. Some of this had to be guesswork. He was not hanging around for proof. There was mud on his shoes, trousers, jacket, and he had no doubt on his face. Another bloody mistake. Of course he would be covered in muck. Grenades don't explode and cover you in aftershave. The still wet mud had another use as an excellent glue. Climbing up the path of the quarry, the track dried out into fine white dust that attached itself to Jerome's mud. His pause behind the gate established he was not fit for purpose. He not only looked like a flour miller, he stank. The brambles on either side of the entrance to the quarry that once hindered him were now his friends, ideal cover to peer around before quitting the quarry. He could not leave the lane in the state he was in. A break in the hedgerow allowed him to step into a field and slip down behind the hedge. His hands were shaking, and the wave of tension across his stomach almost triggered a vomit. Sitting in the field was not helping. The lack of action gave his imagination time to attack. Cleaning his shoes and clothing on the tufts of grass in the field helped calm his psychological state. But it was a good half hour before he felt and looked presentable enough to step back into the lane and start the long walk back to the car park. The Ordnance Survey chart did its job well, steering him away from a small village and allowing him to avoid most of the houses on the route. For the first mile, his only witness, a horse, or the head of a horse, a solitary movement behind a hedge that followed him with just two snorts from elastic black nostrils. Then he ran into the local population. A black cat that rushed across the road to slow his walk by threading itself between his legs. A hunting spaniel that flopped out of the hedge in front of him and watched him with sad eyes as he walked quickly past. A small pond to his left erupted into a babble as ducks grumbled off the banks and skidded into the water as he approached. Then, once more, he was alone, the crunch of his footsteps on gravel saving his ears from a painful silence. He did not think about what he had done. He did not think what he would say to Gemma. What do you say to someone when you have just murdered their husband? He had to stay alert. If he met someone, he had to try and avoid them. If they could not be bypassed, he had to move and make himself as unforgettable as possible. He turned out of the small lane and onto the main road. The map said 100 meters, and the map was right. The supermarket sat exactly where he had left it. His car waited just 100 paces away. It appeared empty, but of course Gemma would be laying in the back. He did not want to startle her. A small piece of gravel tossed onto the roof framed her face in the rear window. He heard a vehicle approaching and ducked behind the car. It was better no one saw him getting into it. Sliding into the driver's seat, he paused before starting the engine. He should speak, but instinct told him not to. There was nothing to say. He started the engine and drove quickly away, leaving the main road and turning onto the busy M3, vanishing into the 70-mile-an-hour traffic jam heading towards London. He drove on automatic for half an hour, glancing in the driving mirror to catch sight of Gemma. But Madame was on the floor, he assumed, as the mirror was always empty. He wanted to speak, but his tongue seemed to have disconnected itself from his brain. the sort of safety reaction to shut him up. In this situation, 99% of what he was thinking of saying would be wrong. The click of the turn indicators brought a whisper from the back of the car. "What are you doing?" Gemma's voice was tight from her long silence. "Stopping at a motorway service. We can talk." "No!" He switched off the clicking and stayed in his lane. "Get me back to London." "It's all right, Gemma. Everything's all right. Get me back to London." It was an order, flat and emotionless. Okay. She did not want to talk. He understood. It had been difficult for him. It must have been a nightmare for her. To psych herself up to drive Nicholas to his death would have taken a month's supply of emotional energy and a huge ration of courage. The atmosphere in the car as she drove him to the supermarket car park, knowing it was the last time she would see him, would not have produced any giggles. But the sight of Nicholas, laying with a stupid grin on his face across the back seat of the car, flashed back. Jerome realized his palms were sweating. They were slipping on the steering wheel. The feeling that something was terribly wrong grabbed him in a tight half Nelson. What was it? He thought back over Nicholas's grin. Okay, the guy was drunk. He wouldn't know he was grinning. So what was it that gave Jerome a feeling of almost horror? It was the eyes. Nicholas had the wrong sort of eyes. Yes, that was it. Nicholas's eyes did not fit his character. Nicholas was a wife-beating, woman-chasing, double-dealing, menacing alcoholic. The Nicholas Jerome saw had friendly eyes, not the eyes of a wife-beater, and his mouth, the smiling lips, were not the sort of lips one could imagine twisted in cruelty. Jerome was plumping for the first sight he had had of Nicholas, the happy, smiling guy on the cover of his book. That, he realized, was the reason for his mind-bending unease. "I need to speak." He spoke loudly at the windscreen without taking his eyes off the road. He needed reassuring words from Gemma. "I can't." He barely heard her whisper. He had not seen her. He could not tell what state she was in. She had not asked if Nicholas was dead. She had not asked if the plan had worked. She had asked nothing. She was already arming herself up in her new role, a widow with a terrible loss, a newly created single parent, a celebrity's wife open to public pity, parrying questions and accepting sympathy. For the next few weeks, her life was going to be a nightmare. This was not an ordinary death. It would be newsworthy for weeks. She would be hounded by the press, paparazzi, and the police. The traffic thickened noticeably as they entered the capital, sharing his concentration with the well-being of the woman in the back. Leaving the motorway, he threaded his way to the nearest tube station. "Don't call, I'll call you." The rear door clicked closed. He did not see her face, just her back, as she passed swiftly through the entrance to the station. She was back in charge. His work was finished. When she judged it time to call him, she would call. It might be a week, a month, or months. Or it might be never. He parked his car and went to see his friends. The warm pulse of the whiskey unthreaded the stress of the day. No more Nicholas, no more Imagine, no more hotels. And what about anticipation? His life had stopped. Now there would be a new direction. In which way, he had no idea. He sat for an hour in Field Marshal Montgomery's lap. Further thought was a waste of time. He had to wait for the next contact with Gemma. Closing his armory, he crossed to the front of the house. The lemon had gone, giving up his sentry duty 3 days ago. Maybe the death of both his money and Jennifer had filtered through, which was a point. If he was still her next of kin, and as far as he knew he probably was, Jennifer's estate, which seemed to be considerable in view of the number of lemon orchards she had been harvesting, should be logically moving in his direction. He would make inquiries the next day. At 7 o'clock, he scanned the internet, turned on the 24-hour news channel on the TV, and at the same time switched on the radio. Nothing. Nothing anywhere. He sat tapping out impatience with his fingers on the table. This was not supposed to happen. For God's sake, he had killed someone. Hadn't anyone noticed? Didn't anyone go near the bloody quarry? He had been expecting blood-curdling headlines. Massacre in quarry. Violent explosion kills author. Celebrity savagely slain. His fingers tapped faster, now with annoyance. Bad thinking again. Obviously there'd been an explosion. The police would have called in the army to search for further weapons. The terrorist branch would have to be called. Explosions were their territory. Nicholas was in so many pieces, identification would take time. Expecting news so soon after the crime was just being stupid. Had Gemma reported Nicholas missing yet? Now his nerves were really turning wicked. It was 7 o'clock, 4 hours since the death. Of course she hadn't. He must calm down, resume his normal life, go to work tomorrow as though nothing had happened. No, he could not go to work tomorrow. He told them he had flu. Flu didn't pass in a day. The tension and exertion of the last 24 hours suddenly hit. He was tired, very tired. Even though it was only 7:30, he started his routine of closing up his house for the night. Latching and chaining the front door, he had barely reached the staircase when the silence of the house was shattered. Jerome jumped. The front doorbell jangled loudly just above his head. It was too late for callers, and anyway, Jerome never had callers. He could hear the throb of a diesel engine from a car or cab parked outside his house. Leaving the chain on the lock, he opened the door 2 inches as he switched on the outside light. "Parcel for Mr. Archer." The cabbie offered a box to the crack in the door. Releasing the safety chain, Jerome opened the door wide. The cabbie looked at his watch. "Special delivery." He looked at his watch again. "Not bad, eh? Half an hour from Grosvenor Square." Jerome took the parcel. Said it was urgent, you'd need it soon. The sender's name, written in the bottom right-hand corner, was smaller than Jerome's name and address, except, with the shock effect, it was not. Had it been a white, hot branding iron, it could not have burnt his way into his brain more effectively. Nicholas Lumarine, 7 Jefferson Court, Grosvenor Square, London. "You all right, sir?" The cabbie grabbed, saving Jerome from a damaged shoulder as he swayed towards the doorpost. "You've gone white." Jerome pushed himself straight with a muttered excuse about working too hard. The parcel was quite heavy, and in his shaky state, Jerome turned and placed it on the hall table before signing the proffered note. "When did he give you this parcel?" "Like I said, half an hour ago." The cabbie walked down the garden path, but paused and turned after a few steps. "He's a famous author, you know." Jerome could only nod stupidly as he closed and rechained the door. He placed the parcel on the kitchen table. Nicholas Lumarine was dead in the quarry, yet Nicholas Lumarine had been in Grosvenor Square half an hour ago, and all-seeing, all-hearing Nicholas Lumarine knew his address, and Nicholas Lumarine had sent him a parcel from the grave. Jerome did not have to open the parcel. He knew exactly what Nicholas had sent him. Jerome had handed Nicholas a grenade. Now Nicholas was returning the compliment. He had sent him an American Colt .45 with which to kill Gemma. Was it the same gun he had given back to Charlie? Doubtful. Charlie would never tell Nicholas the gun had been refused. It would be against his religion called prophet. He had to speak to her. Telephoning was too traceable. A letter would take too long. There was only one solution. He would wait outside her flat. But there was something more urgent first. Ripping open the parcel, he lifted out the Colt. It was not loaded, but nothing had been forgotten. This time 6 bullets lay in the bottom of the box, held together by sellotape. Taking the gun into his armoury, he flipped open the barrel. With a small ball-peen hammer in his right hand, the weapon, still broken open in his left, was about to put Nicholas's powers to the test. A light tap from the hammer on the side of the firing pin was all that was necessary to make the weapon useless. To check his work, he slipped one of the bullets into the barrel of the pistol, pointing it at the statue of Winston Churchill, and he pressed the trigger. The click of the broken firing mechanism was as lifeless as the gun. "Now, Nicholas, beat that," he muttered. It was pointless waiting out Gemma's flat that night. He would leave early in the morning. He would not be expected to work. He still had virtual flu. The night was long, too long. He fell asleep around 5 o'clock, which was the reason the sun, waking him by warming his forehead at 10 o'clock, caused his mad charge to join the day. He was too late. Gemma's Jefferson Court was under siege. A glitter of camera lenses surrounded the entrance. Journalists were lodged in every nook and cranny within 50 yards of the place. Jerome threaded his way through the notebooks and microphones. The sound bites of conversation between the news harvesters had Gemma and Nicholas in most of the sentences. The quarry had given up its secret. Nicholas was dead, but he was not making a good job of it. He was still communicating with Jerome. The first week after the murder was difficult. Jerome returned to work. He followed the story on the news, but like most media-whipped headlines, lack of progress brought early evaporation. His anxiety, at first almost unbearable, wore down to a constant, exhausting nag. He stood in the upstairs front window of his house, waiting for another parcel to arrive. Surely, Nicholas, whether he was in heaven or hell, must have realized his plot was falling to bits. His would-be assassin had destroyed his weapon. Also, his would-be victim had not contacted the would-be assassin, making murder impossible. She did not call, she did not email him. He had spent 2 weeks looking out of his window, wondering and worrying when his street was suddenly illuminated with style. There was only one house outside which the silver Rolls-Royce would stop. He knew it the moment it glided around the corner and coasted towards him. Superglued by a shandy of fear and excitement, his eyes never left the man in the light grey suit with an open neck and over-white shirt, who stood elegantly from the car, strolled up his path, rang his bell, and waited on his doorstep. Jerome did not hurry downstairs. He had a feeling a lot of his questions were about to be answered. The car must have been the first Rolls ever in the street. He could imagine neighbours' curtains moving minutely, and it could only have come from 2 people, Gemma or Nicholas Lumarine. The man was smiling invitingly. With the compliments of Mrs. Lumarine, he turned and indicated the luxurious cloud at the curbside. "She wishes you to join her for dinner." Relief trembled across Jerome's chest. At least it had come from someone living. How could he have doubted her? Of course she had to be careful, twice as careful in the glare of publicity. She was not only protecting herself, she was protecting him as well. 5 minutes, he blurted. Tearing into his bedroom, he changed into a suit, ran his electric razor over his face, cleaned his teeth, and was locking his front door with a minute to spare. He floated in the silent luxury, sinking into deep leather upholstery, breathing scented air conditioning for 50 minutes until the motion stopped and the over-white shirt was opening the door respectfully. He was in Grosvenor Square, outside Jefferson Court. 2 weeks of no news meant no new shunters. The media siege had lifted. "The penthouse, sir." The over-white shirt slipped into the car and purred away. He reached out before he could make contact. A porter opened the door, allowing indulgence and extravagance to grab and drag him in. A flower arrangement large enough to get lost in rose like a colourful fountain from the middle of the hall floor. A neutered perfume, neither masculine or feminine, almost carried him to another door that again opened at the touch of a porter. The lift for the penthouse is on the left, sir. How did the porter know he was going to the penthouse? Jerome thought no further. He was in rich land here. Everyone knew and anticipated everything. The lift stopped, the door hissed open, and Jerome was in Gemma's lounge. A red carpet bled from the lift across the room to the window. With her back against the glass, the golden gown almost open from floor to neck, holding 2 flutes of champagne and staring intently at his face, stood Gemma. He stood at his end of the carpet for 3 beats, anticipation and excitement kidnapping him. Strange, disturbing, unsettling. Any of the adjectives could describe her stare. Jerome felt disquiet join his emotional party and slip its arm around his shoulders, cuddling him close. A flute was offered. He took it. Her expression had not changed. She was drinking him in with her eyes, examining each millimetre of his face minutely. What? Her stare did not waver, even with this question. I have something to show you, she said. The sofa he was led to pressed close as he sank into the soft leather. The champagne bucket was on a table before them, and from somewhere soft music filtered, gentle music, alluring music. Was this the setup to a seduction scene? Jerome was unsure. Gemma was still soaking him with her stare as she handed him a few A4 pages. It was Imagine again. Nicholas's last few paragraphs? Jerome closed his eyes after the first few lines. He was reading himself. The preparations for the murder were listed, almost as he had planned them. Read. It was an order. Jerome's discomfort moved up 2 gears. Gemma's stare had vanished. Her eyes now sparkled with excitement. The story was burrowing into him. Descriptions handcuffed him. Emotions strangled him. And then, on page 165, he was poleaxed. Nicholas began to describe his own death. To his astonishment, he saw the pages in his hands begin to shake. But the story was relentless. The delivery of the gun, the Rolls-Royce calling for him, the description of the flowers in the hall of Jefferson Court. The book was describing what had happened not 10 minutes ago. It can't be! He was perspiring. A river was running down his back. He's dead. He cannot know what is still happening. Jerome. She was twinkling all over. My darling, you are so gullible. Now she was laughing all over. You still don't get it, do you? Her mix of amusement, triumph, and delight confused him further. I killed him. I killed Nicholas. No, you killed my husband. Now her eyes were waiting, watching, and waiting again for his reaction. Yet the book is still being written, she continued. Then either he is writing it from his grave, which is impossible, or someone else is writing it. He stared at the pages. How could a book be having such a terrible effect on him? But that someone knows what's happened between us. Her head tilted slightly, as if she was expecting a reaction. But there is only you or me, Jerome. Nicholas is dead. If her giggle had been a brick, it could not have hit him more effectively. Nicholas Lumarine is not dead. Her assertion, quiet and soft, reloaded his shock. I killed him, Jerome shouted. Gemma shook her head. You killed my husband. Her repeat was followed by a death pause. His furrowed brow and his scowl, built on puzzlement, were prizes for Gemma. She could almost see his questions. What was she talking about? Where were they going? Who had written the last piece of script? My husband's name is Walter. Her voice was bringing him back to a reality that was frightening him. My name is Gemma, but my writing name is... Her voice quavered, on her laughter. Nicholas. Her smile was 50 miles wide. Now, she laughed. Isn't that funny? All has been revealed, but has it? We must change the credits. Listen to episode 19 of Imagine by Bernard King and Gemma Lumarine. But Gemma is not finished with Jerome, and Jerome is certainly not finished with Gemma. Listen as sparks fly in the next episode of Imagine.